Hello and welcome to the Explore the Circular Economy show, where we talk about the transition away from a take, make, waste linear economy to one that designs out waste and pollution, keeps products and materials in use, and regenerates natural systems. We stream every Tuesday lunchtime UK time on LinkedIn, YouTube, Facebook and Twitter, so make sure you catch us there. My name is Seb, I'm part of the learning team here at the Foundation and the co-host of this show along with...
Hi, my name is Laura and I'm also part of the learning team here at the MacArthur Foundation. I'm very excited to be co-hosting today's show where we are going to explore the answer to the question, how can art help us save the economy for the better?
We're not just going to be talking about art, we're going to be exploring it and expressing it live with two artists via a form of something called picture couture, I'm told, but maybe they'll tell us exactly what that means, and we're beginning to explore this kind of connection between circular economy and art, and we'll find out what that means in a moment, and we'll introduce you to our two guests. But why are we talking about art at all? Well, the Foundation's most recent trustee, Wolfgang Blau, kind of raised this topic at our annual summit last year, and we're about to play you a clip to find out exactly what he said to set the scene for this conversation. So here's the clip from Wolfgang Blau last June.
So media has an opportunity to potentially create a crystallization and articulation of that longing culturally, as well as the technical solutions being developed in innovation in companies, in universities, and so on.
And who does that better than artists, I think? It is, I think, the artists, where are the artists? The writers, the filmmakers. I know they exist, of course, we can mention the examples, but we will need, as long as artists don't talk about the circular economy, and writers and poets, it will always be a topic for an engineering and financial elite.
That was Wolfgang Blau, president of Condé Nast International. Now, we have two very special guests today with us. First, we have Fanny Breteau, our designer and art director at the MacArthur Foundation, and we are also joined by Emma Hislop, who defines herself as a research-based artist, writer, and sculptor. Starting with you, Emma, you are the Foundation's first artist in residence. What does this mean, and how did it happen?
Seems like we're waiting for Emma to get connected. But yes, I mean, we're talking about art here, Laura. Hopefully we'll get them online now. Something that's really powerful from what I really took from what Wolfgang said is kind of that switching a system or transitioning from one economy to the other, it can't just be done by talking about kind of the mathematics of it. It's something that people feel because it affects people's lives. And that's kind of, in many ways, when we think about that, we think about many of the poets and artists and storytellers that we associate with.
Yeah, and I think this is one of the main things we're gonna probably repeat several times in today's show, but it looks like we can actually get our artist in residence online now. Hi, Emma.
Hi, Laura, can you hear me okay?
Yes, we can hear you perfectly fine. My first question to you was, how did this thing about the artist in residence happen? And could you tell us a little bit more about your background?
Yeah, so I'm really honoured to be chosen for the first artist in residence post. It's so exciting and it feels really pertinent with everything that is going on in the world at the moment, especially with COVID-19. People have a lot more time to consider the world around them, as well as various issues, one of which being ecology and the climate emergency. So working with the Foundation and circular economy is just so important for arts and culture, which really acts as a connector and a communicator for that and storytelling. So I was brought in through seeing a talk by Joe Iles at the foundation, who spoke about that cars spend 92% of their time stationary and out of use, which blew my mind. And as I looked into circular economy more, it became apparent that that was the term for everything that I look at. And then I applied for the foundation and had an interview, and here we are. And it's been really exciting getting to know the team.
And we've also got on the line Fanny. And Fanny, you and I have worked together for 6 years. Lucky for you. But I guess that what's your, you're a graphic designer here at the Ellen MacArthur Foundation. You work in our digital team. But what's your relationship with art, if that's the right way to put it?
Hi Seb, hi Laura, hi Emma, hi everyone. Yes, indeed. So I work as a designer and an art director. So as part of my work with the foundation, I visualize ideas and concepts relating to the circular economy. And I also have an art practice on the side where I explore different ways of seeing and perceiving, like phenomena such as randomness, complexity, and I'm trying to bring it to my graphic design work at the foundation. So, yeah, that's the story, I guess.
And this is very interesting. And we said in the beginning that we are going to be talking about art and artists, and we're going to aim to answer that question. But we want to do this in a very interactive way, right, Seb? And
what's the point in talking about art and just talking about it? Let's actually look at some art.
Exactly. So we've asked both of our speakers to send us some images of examples of art in action, and they actually they have no idea what the other one has sent us or what order we're going to play these. So I think it's the right moment to start. Are we ready?
First up, Bruce Willis. What a fantastic film. Who chose this one?
So that would be me. So on the screen you've got a screenshot of The Fifth Element, which is my favourite film, with Mila Jovovich and Bruce Willis. Fanny, I don't know if you've seen this film?
I have, Emma. I love it.
Good. So this film is one of my absolute favourites, and I picked it because the actual title, The Fifth Element, ties into a lot of the research I've been doing while with the foundation. The fifth element, also known as the fifth fundamental force, is ether. That's kind of been written off now through science due to like Einstein's theory of relativity, but brought back a little bit more now with new scientists looking at string theory. I'm not going to get too in depth with that because it might start confusing everyone.
I'm already slightly confused, Emma. So let's go easy on the string theory.
So basically, the fifth element that you see in the film is Mila Jovovich's character, who's the key to saving the world. You've got earth, wind, fire, and water, and she is basically ether, which is the spirit of the world. It's everything that surrounds us. The in between, the negative space, that presence you feel when the wind blows a certain way. And I thought this film really covers the fact that art brings together new perspectives. It's due to that storytelling and subverting of ideas. It gives you new systems of thinking. And in circular economy, systems thinking is, absolutely one of the core things that we need to consider. And this taps into psychology, scientific research, and relationships between environment, ecology, technology, and consequences of, in the film, a lot of like trash lying around. It doesn't hide that fact where other sci-fi films do.
And Fanny, you said you've seen the film. What there's an interesting kind of thing to talk about in terms of science fiction, and when we talk about future change in the world. What do you think of when you think of Fifth Element, of this image?
Well, I've seen the film like a long time ago, but when I see this image, it reminds me of like just thinking about fantasy films, so science fiction, that indeed, like a while ago, I had conversations with fellow designers and artists thinking we need more fiction, more science fiction, more different perspectives on what the future could be, good or bad, just to try to imagine different scenarios. So that's what comes to my mind.
And that's what I guess Wolfgang Blau was kind of talking about. One of the things I find always interesting about science fiction is I always think of Blade Runner. They've got robots and Borgs and all sorts of crazy things going on, but the first scene of the film, Harrison Ford goes and uses a payphone to make the phone call, even though it was I think it's based in 2020, but it was obviously made in the 1980s or something. So it's amazing how some of the things we can imagine or start to imagine, but some of the things that are quite unimaginable, like mobile phones. This is very fast-paced, guys, so we haven't actually got time to dwell too long on any particular image. And indeed, the time is up on that one. Oh my God, what is this?
What is this? Who chose this picture?
So I chose this picture. So this is Björk, an Icelandic music artist. She's considered as a pop star, but she's also quite experimental. So this image is from an album cover of one of her recent albums, called Utopia, and her face is has been the picture has been retouched, but she plays a lot with self-expression and had recently a 3D mask made based on her face. So she collaborates with designers, engineers, other artists to experiment constantly with her image, and often, usually, always actually, there's really strong reflection about what it means to be human, what it means to be alive today, and the relationships with other living beings and the surrounding, the environment. And I think I chose that picture of her because it is quite, it shows quite well, it portrays Björk quite well, but she is, for me, a really great example of someone who experiments constantly, relentlessly, and collaborates with other people to bring new visions of the world to life. And I think as an approach, as a mindset, she is a huge inspiration and great demonstration of what it is to experiment and in collaboration with others. And this is something that I think is inspiring for when we think about changing the way the economy works. Experimentation and collaboration are key.
And funny, when you mentioned you might put an image about her, I looked her up just to find out a bit more about this artist, and I saw that she has actually filmed a documentary with David Attenborough on the connection between music, art, and technology. And something he says in this documentary is that don't listen to her music when you are tired, because it's actually music that will stimulate thoughts and new ways of thinking about many different things in nature and in life. So yeah, I just wanted to say that, I was very impressed by her music.
I love Björk. Tell us in the comments if you also love Björk.
Yeah.
Emma, do you love Björk?
I absolutely love Björk. She's a huge inspiration for me, Fanny. I'm so glad you picked her. She's incredible. She really, everything you said, Fanny, about her inspiring experimentation and collaboration is so important. And she's a huge fan of one of my favourite writers, Timothy Morton. Definitely recommend the viewers to check him out as well if you haven't already.
Yeah, and definitely an example of someone who asks you, what is it to be a pop star? Because in some ways it could be quite prototypical, but there's something about art, the ability to kind of push the boundaries, and she's extremely successful. Yeah. Well, it's fast-paced, we've got to keep going. I don't know what I'm looking at here. It's like 3 green blocks. Who wants to claim responsibility for this image?
So I chose that photo, Fanny, here, and this is an installation by a French artist called Fabien Léostic. It's called Runes, and what it is has 3 blocks that you can see on the picture, covered with phytoplankton. Am I pronouncing right?
No idea.
Plankton, like
For us, it's fine.
Okay, so a small algae that live obviously in the sea. So usually these type of algae is invisible to the eye, to the human eye, but because there's so much, you can actually see it. And the idea of this installation is that it lives over time. So when the installation was first set up, the artist put on some algae on those like 3 blocks with water and light. And over time, as people enter the exhibition space and bring in particles and air, the temperature changes, the algae start grow, decline sometimes, the colors change. So here on the photo, you see differences in color. It's because the algae have reacted differently, or sometimes apparently there were some parts of the block were attacked by fungi. So this is a reflection on life cycle, on how it's possible actually to make something that's invisible visible for humans, and how you can set conditions for things to grow, but then there are so many factors influencing the life of a living being, of this algae, that actually it's not possible to control all the factors. And I saw it in Paris, and I thought that was a really interesting way to understand the concept of a complex system and how many factors can influence something. You can see it, you can feel it, you can smell it. It was a really interesting installation.
I love the idea that art, in some ways, it's about. And firstly, maybe I have a question for you about this, Emma. But there's something about like the way art can emulate that natural sense that actually we don't have control of everything, and actually when you put art into the world, you also don't have control over it. And this exposition shows it. My question to Emma is actually, some people might not think of this as art. Some people might be surprised that in a session about art, we're talking about a sort of algae installation. Art is very diverse, isn't it?
Yeah, definitely. It also depends on the setting that you put it in for different audiences to interact. Like with this current webinar, most of the people that are probably checking in are people who have businesses and are entrepreneurs who are interested in circular economy and maybe haven't considered art in that way. They might be interested in biodesign and have a connection through algae that way. A really interesting topic to look up as well. But it is how you represent something. So this is taking research out from the lab and into the open sphere for people to connect with and interact with. And when you see something up close and it's generating something that's growing and you're interacting with it, that immersion, that's how you really connect ideas with someone. And it's like inception. You really get under the skin of someone, plant that seed, and that's how you start to grow innovation and inspiration in the wider audiences. And that's definitely what I think the future is for the economy as well as the foundation. And anyone who's trying to change and diversify the system has to do it through that inception. And that's how that kind of work starts to become, almost like, dare I say, a pandemic of spreading
you brought
through
up the film
everyone.
Inception and pandemic.
What do we do now?
We've got to keep moving. We've got to keep moving.
So we've had films, we've had music and installation. What do we have here? Who chose this photo?
So that was me, Emma. So this one, we're getting techie here. So this one is glass. And glass, I've been learning scientific glass blowing for the past couple of years with the Scottish Environmental Resource Centre. I've got some of the British Society of Scientific Glassblowers in there. Shout out to Robert, who is always teaching me, even though I'm a terrible student. And one of the most interesting things I've learned about glass is it isn't a solid. you look at it and do you ever really consider why it's transparent? It's because it's an amorphous solid, which is more of a supercooled liquid. Like it's always moving, even though it's also static. It's between two skins. And I put this on because I wanted to know what we can take from that. Like as an artist, I like to look at different points of interest to take inspiration from the way they function. So part of this residency for me is looking at what artistic practices can bring in from the circular economy to implement that in how we work as artists. And for me, glass kind of does this. The way that the molecules of glass move is disorganized. They don't have any structure in terms of how they react. Like, again, the economy, it's not a predictable thing. You can make forecasts, but it does just kind of naturally react. And glass is a natural product, although we can manufacture it, it is something that naturally occurs. And I would like to know where people see this kind of system and this kind of behavior in other kind of metaphors. Is it in a film you've seen? Is it in an artwork? Is it in everyday life? Where do things move in that similar way to these molecules? And there's also so much to be said for glass as a material, as well as like the work of MIT Media Lab and Neri Oxman, who's just incredible in looking at different materials like mycelium that can be an alternative to plastic. I think materials are where the future is.
And I think like it's clear to me that you have a very special relationship with this material. And in the circular economy, we talk a lot about materials and how we can keep them in use and in their, like so they can retain their maximum like value for as long as possible. Fanny, do you have a specific material that you also have developed as an artist, a special relationship with, and why?
It's interesting. So I haven't in the same way that you have, Emma, I guess. But I am indeed constantly on the look for, or I think and I reflect on how materials can be used and what are the type of materials that would make sense in a circular practice. And I've worked a lot with quite, I guess, like quite simple materials, like even using charcoal a lot. At the moment, but it's a constant reflection in terms of what is the fate or what is the life cycle of a material and what happens afterwards. That actually leads me to think about is an art piece eternal? Should it's once an artist creates an installation, what happens afterwards? Is it meant to stay static or is it meant to stay a piece of like glassware, or can it be transformed? That makes me think about the life cycle of a piece of art as well.
Just as we want to think about how art evolves, we have to evolve this picture culture to the next image, which is, I believe you chose this one, Emma.
Yes, I did.
Again, it's one actually I don't know how to describe it, so maybe you best describe it.
So this is an immersive installation by my absolute all-time favourite artist, Katie Patterson, who's also Scottish, one of our own. This work is called Hollow. It is an immersive sculptural room come forest of all the world's trees. And she describes it as a microcosmos of every tree on Earth. It includes over 10,000 of the world's tree species, donated samples, and one she's gone out and collected with permissions, of course, from some of the most incredible wood collectors in the world. There was one guy who donated his 5,000 species collection, and these are usually cut to specific wood sample sizes. So she used that as a format to build this immersive space in, I can't quite remember which university it's in, but you can definitely have a look up on that online. There's a really great film, What Do Artists Do All Day, of her making of this work. You know, that famous series on BBC4, which I think most of it's on YouTube now, so definitely check that out if you're interested in how artists work on a daily basis. So Katie Patterson created this as like a time capsule of history. It encompasses evolution, you know, wood is a fossil, and how we can learn from every single piece of wood in there, as well as just be inspired. There's a lot of children that go and interact with it. And I think, you know, shout out to Michael Jackson, children are the future, and inspiring them is how we move forward. It reflects the value of collaboration of art and science. She had to work with so many different people. This was a really long-term.
Can I clarify, Emma, do people walk inside of this?
They do, yeah. So from the outside, it just looks like struts of timber. She worked with an architecture company, but inside, it is like really immersive. It's like a cave with some holes at the top that you can, it's almost like you're looking through the forest canopy.
Wow. Well, we've not got much time left, so we're going to have to accelerate, Laura, in order to get everything we want to get in. Let's move on to our final part of the picture culture.
I think we all know what this is.
Maybe Fanny's going to tell us different. Fanny, is this what we think it is? Why did you choose this?
It is the Earth. So it's in what's special about this one is it's one of the most reproduced image in history. And this image, this photograph, was taken in 1972 by the crew of Apollo 17 spacecraft on its way to the moon. So it's called, actually, this image is so famous, it even has a name. It's called the Blue Marble. So as such, it's not a piece of art, but I chose it because it's always nice to do a bit of earth gazing, you know, and also because it has a huge importance, I think. It's had a huge importance in changing the way we view the world. And actually, it's the first time in history that human beings could see the Earth as a singular dynamic system. And actually, astronauts who have experienced this view, but live from outer space, have talked about a cognitive shift in their minds. So for instance, they could no longer relate to concepts of borders. So home for them was no longer like the United States or Spain or Australia, but rather the Earth. So and scientists since that time have studied this, and it's been called since the overview effect. The overview effect is about the cognitive shifts that happen in people's mind who have seen the Earth like as a live, complex, dynamic system, and a whole like system. So I chose this image because I think it's beautiful, but to show, I guess, the power that images or arts have to, the power arts or images have in making us understand or shift our experience of the world, of our environment, and how we think about what's around us.
You just reminded me of something that Kate Raworth, the author of Donut Economics, always says, that is change the pictures and change the world. So I think that summarizes a little bit the impact of this image that you just told us about. As a last question, Seb and I would like to ask our two guests, do you think everyone is an artist?
So it depends what your term of artist is. I believe everyone can be an artist. I don't think that you just are off the bat, to be honest, which is probably a little bit controversial, but you know, it is a branch of knowledge and a study. It takes time, as everything. I wouldn't say I'm a guitarist because I can strum it, but I definitely think everyone can be, and everyone should try and be at some point in their lives.
And Fanny, if there's one thing we want to take away from this conversation, and this really is just the beginning, it's just an exploration, and we've just tried to shed light on a few themes. What's the one thing you might be taking away, or the one thing you'd like the audience to take away?
That artists or arts help us see ahead. It's like a famous classic poet called Rimbaud talked about artists and poets as people who could see ahead, who had vision, who could see ahead and use their intuition to create visions of the world. And one takeaway for me would be that in imagining or in trying to transition to a different to a circular economy, to a different way for the economy to work, we need to use our intuition to think like artists, to be able to proceed to transition and to imagine new ways of thinking and new ways of doing things.
I think that's really powerful to say we need to be able to imagine something differently, which is the power of art. And we've seen from some of the images even you guys have just selected in this short conversation that the art can play a role of exploring and experimenting with the future. And the Fifth Element example, art can reveal a lack of control and experimentation. Art can, in some ways, the glass example Emma was talking about, materials can be paints of the future. And then obviously our final image that, looking at the world, that notion that actually just shifts perspectives. And obviously you link that to Kate Rayworth, Lara.
Yeah. I think we should definitely have another episode about art, Seb. But we need to say goodbye and thank you to our guests now. Thank you so much, Fanny and Emma, for being with us today in the show. Next week on episode 6 of the Explore the Circular Economy show, we're going to be talking about how the circular economy offers a solution to build back better after the COVID-19 crisis. More than 50 global leaders, including CEOs, policymakers, NGOs, academics, and many others have joined the foundation and signed a statement saying that now is the time to step up and not step back. And it's the time to do more and not the time to do less. So we will be discussing the statement and with some of them and exploring how we can actually put this into practice with the circular economy. We are going to leave the news item in the comments box wherever you are watching this episode on. And I'm also happy to announce that if you prefer to listen to our content, we would like to remind you of our podcast channel called Explore the Circular Economy. You can find it on Spotify or on Apple Podcasts, and we've just shared our first episode there, but you can catch up on others as they will be published. All the information about our previous episodes is on our website, and thank you again for watching it online. But before we leave...
Before next week, there's something else that's been going on, as you might better see from, we may have seen in the image that we were, with our little table set up here. The foundation is currently halfway through its Big Food Workshop that's also been streaming from this studio on YouTube, LinkedIn, Facebook and Twitter. Be sure to check that on our news website. I think the registration link is in a news item on our website, or by just navigating where the recordings are on our YouTube channels. The next actual live session is at 5 p.m. UK time today, where we're going to be joining by a collection of award-winning chefs to look at the culinary selection and menu design for the future of the food system. But to give you a little taster, we're just going to play you out with a clip from yesterday's conversation where Emma Chow was in conversation with Caroline Steele, author of Zootopia and the Hungry City. They're going to be talking about the relationship between food, the economy, and the city. So take a listen to this, and we hope to see you next week.
You are investigating food, you're looking at the economy, and you are understanding how you can't speak about the economy without speaking about food, and vice versa is also true. And you mentioned a particular Greek word that I want you to elaborate on, oikonomia. Hopefully I'm pronouncing that correctly or close enough.
It's right to ask, so let's just assume you are.
But I'd love for our audience's value, just to explain what that word is and how you contextualize it.
Yeah, no, thank you for that. Well, oikonomia, which of course, however you pronounce it, is in fact the word that gave us our modern word economics, is a really interesting concept. Both Plato and Aristotle talk about this a lot. And it really is about the relationship between the city and the productive hinterland that supplies it with food and other resources. And both Plato and Aristotle actually talk about the need for the city to remain small, because basically the bigger it gets, the further and further away it gets from its, sources of sustenance. It's a kind of geometrical problem, if you like. So for both of them, the ideal was a kind of what I call the fried egg, approach to urbanity, which is that the city is a kind of like the yolk in the middle, and the white is the countryside around. Now, the word oikonomia actually means household management. So it's from oikos, which is the Greek for house, and nomos, which is the Greek for management, as you would assume, and from what I've just said. And basically, the ideal for them was that every citizen would have a house in the city and a farm in the countryside, and the farm would feed the house. So oikos nomos, or oikonomia, is basically the fact that every household is self-sufficient because it has a little patch of land that feeds it. And then you multiply that up many times, and then the city itself becomes self-sufficient because everybody has a little farm on the outside. And this, for both Plato and Aristotle, was the ideal of the city. So once there were enough people in the city that it could sort of, have the division of labor necessary to kind of, mend shoes and kind of build furniture and so on, then it should grow no bigger. Because, if it remained small, then it would be possible for it to become self-sufficient, which they both saw as the sort of the key to its political autonomy. And I mean, very interestingly, Aristotle warned against another Greek word, krematistike, which interestingly we have not adopted as the root of one of our modern words. I wonder why that could be. But essentially, that is the making of money for its own sake. And I think it's deeply ironic that actually that's pretty much what our modern economics actually do. But Aristotle said there was no point in this because there was never a point at which you reached a balance, because there's never a point at which you have enough money. Whereas if your aim is to reach a balance between city and country, then there is a point at which that can be reached. So I think it's a super, super interesting concept for our time in showing us everything that's wrong with our economics. If I could just say one thing really quickly as well on this very important point, food is the most valuable thing in our lives. We have to have food every day, otherwise we die. So food really is life. And the fact that we've predicated our economics and indeed politics on the existence of something called cheap food, which cannot and does not exist, and we've created the illusion of it by externalizing its true costs, is, in my view, the problem. So what I call Sitopian economics is the idea that we re-embed the value in food and base our new economy around it.
Thank you. There's so much in there to dig into, and just drawing some parallels to our work and some of the findings in our report that we published last year, and this dynamic between urban and peri-urban production. And actually about 40% of the world's existing irrigated cropland is in that 20-kilometer donut around cities. And now in this pandemic, where cities are really starting to wake up and some of the fragility is being exposed, we're looking at how to really redesign these systems to get these balances kind of back in line with what you were just describing centuries ago.